There was a point in my life where sensorimotor OCD almost completely took over. No matter what I did, I couldn't help but focus on automatic bodily sensations like the breath, swallowing, the mouth. It was incredibly difficult to deal with, but I did learn to overcome it. And today, I'm talking about some of the most difficult experiences that I had with sensorimotor OCD, as well as sharing some tips to help you to deal with it more effectively. If you do easily get triggered by new themes, sensorimotor OCD can be quite triggering for some people who don't know about it. So, if you are easily triggered, then perhaps give this episode a miss. If you are struggling with OCD and anxiety and you would like to get some support with that, well, I offer a free discovery call. To get that, you can head over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com. There's a link in the show notes. For me, sensorimotor OCD began when I was 18. One day, for some reason, I think my mouth was perhaps more dry than normal. My attention, my awareness really got fixated on the mouth, on swallowing, on the position of my tongue in the mouth. And I remember it being very, very frustrating. I was kind of thinking about it, a lot that day. And, I started to get concerned. What if I'm not able to kind of not pay attention to this anymore? And, before this, I was already struggling with OCD anyway. For me, it started when I was 16, but I hadn't experienced this kind of obsession before. And so, when those thoughts came in, what if I'm always aware of this? Straight away, suddenly, this became a real kind of fear for me. I was really genuinely kind of upset with the idea that I might be kind of stuck with that awareness of that thing and that I wouldn't be able to pay attention to other things. From that point, it really kind of spiraled out of control. The more that I tried to not be aware of it, of course, the more that I was. And I was getting very judgmental with myself, very harsh with myself. This is unacceptable. I can't be aware of this thing. This is going to ruin everything if I'm aware of this thing. I have to do everything I can. I have to work harder to not be aware of it. And only once I've managed to control this will I be able to kind of feel happy and positive in my life. And of course, that's a really kind of negative thing to do to yourself, because you're setting yourself up for problems when you determine that you're not going to be aware of something, that you can't allow that kind of consciousness of that thing to kind of slip into your awareness at all. Well, you're setting yourselves up for problems, because you're going to be aware of it more. The more that we try to kind of push things down and, to not be aware of them, inadvertently, we make ourselves more aware of them. It's almost like we've got this giant magnet that we're kind of going around with, and we're attracting the very thing that we're trying to not kind of think about. So it's so important that we learn to not do that. But obviously for me at that time, I didn't even know that I had OCD, let alone sensorimotor OCD. So how was I going to do that? I kept on doing the things that I shouldn't do, the things that were actually making it worse for me. And this kind of this problem really grew and grew. At times I would be able to kind of forget about it a little bit, but it would come back all the time, particularly when I was feeling a bit stressed or a bit anxious. It would really be there even more. And, it kind of grew until I went traveling to Australia. I spent a year traveling around Australia when I was 20. And, this problem came with me, as it tends to do. It doesn't really matter, where we are. OCD will typically follow us. And in this situation, when I was traveling, I think initially because it was a new experience, I was very much engaged with meeting new people, doing different activities, that I felt a bit better, with the sensorimotor. But then I went on this road trip, and I remember that during that road trip, of course, there isn't much to kind of distract yourself. You're maybe looking at the scenery, but, I wasn't so present as maybe I had been a few weeks before when I was in Sydney and kind of meeting people and surfing and doing activities. During this road trip, my attention again, it came back to the mouth and swallowing. And it was incredibly difficult this time because it was almost the only thing I could think about. I was going along, I was trying to distract myself from it, but of course it wasn't working. And, one thing that I started to do at that time is when we pulled into a service station, I would buy lots of things, to kind of eat or to chew on, to try to distract myself from the fact that, I was constantly thinking about the mouth and swallowing. I kind of thought that if I just eat things or if I just chew gum the whole time, then it's going to like distract me from it. I'm not going to get so distressed by it. It's going to help me to feel better. So that's what I started doing. I was eating lots of potato chips, lots of sweets. I was chewing gum the rest of the time. But all of those things were actually, of course, compulsions. They were making things worse because, I was sending this message to my brain that awareness of the mouth is not okay at all costs. I have to kind of distract myself from it. I have to kind of be eating these things because then it's going to make me feel a bit better about it. If I'm eating something, then, I'm aware of my mouth, but in a kind of different way. I'm actually using the mouth. I'm eating or I'm chewing gum. And that isn't so bad as just kind of doing nothing at all and being aware of the discomfort of the mouth and being aware of swallowing. And, in the short term, that kind of worked. Whilst I was eating the potato chips or whilst I was chewing, it might help, for a while. But at some point when you stop, now all you've actually done is you've fed that compulsive loop. You've been doing these kinds of things to artificially make you feel better and distract yourself from the obsession in the short term. But once you stop doing those things, well, now perhaps your mouth is kind of sore from eating so many potato chips. Perhaps you have a kind of salty, dry mouth, and maybe you're feeling a bit sick, or you're not feeling good because you've been doing that, and you're much more kind of aware of the mouth than ever. And I remember kind of, after eating all of those things and then chewing that gum, just feeling terrible about myself. I had so much shame about this. What did the other people in the car think about me? Were they seeing me kind of eating the whole time, trying to distract myself from this? They didn't say anything to me, but, perhaps they noticed it. And I had all of this shame about it. What would people think if they knew? And of course, the actual awareness of the mouth, well, it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I was feeling, really terrible about this. I felt like this thing was going to completely ruin my life. And, thankfully, a few weeks after this, it began to kind of fade away again, not because I was doing necessarily the right things, but because I recognized that those particular compulsions that I was doing were making the situation much, much worse. And, I think kind of naturally, in a way, I started to practice acceptance commitment therapy, which is really trying to, allow the discomfort to be there and to really focus on what's going on around you. I think automatically I started to do that. Because I was traveling and doing things and meeting people, that occupied me, and it kind of brought my attention away from the mouth and away from swallowing, and it helped me to kind of feel better. But of course, that was actually by accident that happened. And, when we're dealing with something like sensorimotor OCD, we don't want to get better because of an accident. We want to know exactly what it is that helped us to feel better. And, many years later, I started to learn that actually I had OCD. I started to learn about sensorimotor OCD. And I started to learn about the techniques that can really help you with that. And that's when things really finally changed, because up until that point, well, I was just going around in circles with it. I might get better for a few weeks or a few months, but at some point it would always come back in. And when it did, I would start fighting with it again. I would start, looking for certainty, start checking if it was still there in the morning when I woke up, doing all of these kind of compulsive activities that would keep on bringing it back. When I finally learned about acceptance commitment therapy, that's when things really began to change for with my sensorimotor OCD, because I was able now with sensorimotor OCD to realize that what I really had to do was learn to do nothing at all. The very things that I was doing to try to deal with it were actually the things that were making it worse. They were the compulsions, the checking, the kind of, being overly aware of the swallowing, the kind of ruminating on the situation constantly, thinking about it all the time, trying to figure it out, trying to find solutions to it. All of these things were actually compulsions. And actually, if I didn't do anything at all about it, if I chose instead to say, today I'm going to focus in on my goals and my values. I'm going to get busy in my life. I'm going to take action on doing the things that are actually, very important to me. Meeting other people, spending time with my friends and my family, doing hobbies like surfing that I really enjoy. These things are all things that can enable you to come into the present moment, to get into a bit of a flow state. And I began to notice that when I did that and I stopped trying to push the awareness away, ultimately, I kind of accepted that the awareness might be there and that that's okay. That's when it started to take a back seat more and more often. And it was a real game changer for me because I really began to understand what was meant by acceptance. We're not accepting that we're going to be aware of this thing forever and that it's going to ruin our life, because obviously that's a really horrible and difficult thing to accept. What we're accepting is that in the short term, we might be aware of the thing. And if we are, that's okay. It's not a problem. We can still kind of get on and live our lives despite the fact that we might be aware of the obsession somewhere in the background. And when you can bring that kind of perspective to it, when you can say to yourself, I'm allowed to be aware of this thing. Actually it's okay. And I'm going to get on anyway with the important stuff in my life. You're actually giving yourself an opportunity to forget about it. You're giving yourself an opportunity, to focus on things that are much more important. And at some point when we do that, the awareness, it starts to take a bit of a back seat. More and more, you begin to realize, I haven't thought about it for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, for an hour. At some point in my own story, I began to see that I haven't even thought about it for an entire day. Or 2 days or 3 days at a time, because, I've just kind of told myself it's not a problem anymore. If I'm aware of it, so be it. But I'm going to kind of get back on and really focus on the things in my life that I really want to pay attention to. And when we bring that kind of perspective, to sensorimotor OCD, we bring more compassion, more acceptance, more understanding to it. And we choose to focus on our goals and our values rather than trying to get rid of the awareness. That's a huge part of the puzzle of learning to deal with sensorimotor OCD. So I really hope that you found that helpful. If you are struggling with sensorimotor OCD, I do offer a free discovery call. To get that, you can head over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com. There's a link in the show notes, and I will see you next time. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are dealing with OCD, anxiety, or any mental health concerns, please consult a licensed mental health professional for support.